Hi guys, I'm Melissa and I'm back with another video. Today it's time for my April wrap-up. It might be that the calendar says May, but it's been snowing the past couple of days and it's been real cold. So, well, I'm not sure that the nature knows that it's actually late spring right now, but I'm looking forward to when that actually happens. Let's get into the reading I did over April. I had a really successful month, so I'm going to go over the stats first and then go into my books afterwards. Over April, I obviously also took part in the magical readathon, also known as Taking My Owls, OWLs, where I had to read 12 books to cover all of the prompts in order for me to become an alchemist later on in August. That will be a lot later, so let's not focus on that right now. Anyway, in total over April, I had a really good reading month and I ended up reading 19 things. I mean, some of them were graphic novels and short things, so I'm calling it things, so I cover everything. I read a total of 603,069 pages, which means I read an average of 335 pages per book. The shortest book that I read in April was Tempus Fugit by Kenneth Andersen. This is a very short novelette on 80 pages. The longest book that I read in April was A Fool's Assassin by Hobb, which comes at 630 pages. In terms of genre, I'm back to my norm again of reading mostly fantasies. But I did read a good variety of different genres, so let's go over them really quick. I read 5 science fiction books, I read 6 fantasy books, I read 1 that's retelling. Then I have 1 contemporary, 2 thrillers, 1 urban fantasy, 1 magical realism, 1 horror book, and 1 mystery book. In terms of formatting, I read 1 that was a hardcover, 3 were trade paperbacks, 1 was a mass market, 2 was an ebook, and I read 8 audios and then 4 graphic novels or manga. In terms of age group, 12 of them was adult, 5 of them were YA, 1 was a middle grade, and 1 was a children's book. In terms of the length, I read 13 regular sized novels, I read 1 novelette, I read 4 graphic trades, and I read 1 short story collection. In terms of publication year, 1 of the books I read were published before the 20s. 1 was published in the 90s, 1 was published in the early 2000s, 3 were published in 2014, 2 were published in 2015, 2 were published in 2016, 3 were published in 2017, and then 4 were published in 2018, and I read 2 books that were published in 2019. In terms of page length, I read 1 book that was less than 100 pages, I read 3 books that was between 100 and 199 pages, I read 3 books that was between 200 and 299 pages, then I read 5 books between 300 and 399 pages, and I read 5 books between 400 and 499 pages, then I read 1 book between 500 and 599 pages, and then I read 1 book between 600 and 699 pages. In terms of my serious reading, I read 5 books that were standalones, and the rest of the the remaining 12 books, that doesn't give 18, 19. I wonder what happened here. Because this doesn't get 19. But yeah. Anyway, I started 7 new series, which I went over, and that's correct, so that's not really very good. And I moved on in 5 different series. I didn't complete or catch up to any series, but I hope that I'll make up for that next month. Anyway, let's go over my star rating real quick, and it was a really good reading month in my star rating as well. I read 1 book that was 2 stars, I read 3 books that were 3 stars, 3 books that were 3.5 stars, 6 books that were 4 stars, and then I gave 1 book 4.5 stars, and then I gave 5 books 5 out of 5 stars. So I'm really happy with my 5-star reading this month. Now let's get into the actual books that I read over April. And I will let you know whether it fits an owl and what owl it fit. Yeah. The first thing that I finished was 99 Red Balloons by Elisabeth Carpenter. This is a standalone book and it's a thriller book, and it's part of my genre TBR thing. Right now I'm working over the genre mystery. So this was part of that TBR I have for that project. And I was supposed to finish that in March, but didn't. And I finished it on, I think, the 1st or 2nd of April. This was not exactly what I was hoping for. It is a book that follows the events after a girl is kidnapped and how the family is processing it. Then we move forward a lot of years, and we've actually followed the girl's perspective. We follow the family's perspective, both siblings and parents, and then we follow the one who did it perspective as well. For some reason, I just never really connected to this story. I thought the passages with the victim was interesting when she was explained, like the beginning of the book when she was kidnapped, all of the things she went through, the emotional turmoil and all of that, and how she started out believing this man who kidnapped her until she started thinking there was something wrong with this guy. And then I also kind of like some of the things as the mystery evolved, but I generally just didn't love this book, and so I ended up on a 3 out of 5 stars for this. The next book that I finished was a Grimm Eventyr genfortalt af Kenneth Andersen and Benni Bødker. These are retellings of the Grimm fairy tales, going back to its core and sort of retelling the story as close to its original source as possible. So it's a lot darker than the ones that we've been told later on in life, because they've changed things a little bit around. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that some of the stories were really, really well told. Others were a little bit more, I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed with how it all turned out, because I was hoping for a lot more when I read it, but I ended up still especially enjoying Rapunzel and the Red Riding Hood. No, yes, also that one, but that was not the one I was thinking about. Hansel and Gretel was really great as well. I thought those 3 stories were my favorites, and the others were just normal for me. And then I think that maybe it was like not that much different than what I've been used to when I've been listening to these stories, so I don't know how much different the stories were, or maybe I just remembered them differently. But I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. And this one fit my first owl, which was the Ancient Runes owl, where you needed to read a retelling, so this works for that one. The next thing that I finished was Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett. This is book 15 of the Discworld, but it's the second book set in the City Watch series. This is we're back to following the City Watch, the Vimes and Carrot and all of the others when they're trying to solve a murder mystery. And it's really funny, and I loved it. It is just true Terry Pratchett style, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend all of the Discworld novels, but especially the City Watch and Death sub-series has been my favorite so far. And then with the Witches series closely following after that. But yeah, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, highly enjoyed it, and this also works for one of my owls. This covers the owl History of Magic, which was to read a book that was published more than 10 years ago, and this was published in '94. The next book that I finished was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is part of my BookTube SFF Awards reading, and I started this a little bit before April started, because I had to read it quickly, because it was expiring at the library. I didn't really know what to expect from this one. It's the first time Brandon Sanderson has been writing anything in science fiction, but I ended up really enjoying this one. I thought he did it really well. I don't think that it was noticeable that he's usually a fantasy writer. It follows a young girl. She was called Splint, I think. That was like her nickname in the crew, but she's grown up always wanting to be a pilot, but has been shunned a little bit because of her father is deemed a traitor to this world. And so she has had a really difficult time actually being allowed to take a pilot training. But she becomes part of this new crew where in the beginning there are, I think, 10 cadets or something like that. And then she has to figure out how she's developing as a pilot. And so she's ready for fighting whenever the enemy is striking. And we don't really know who the enemies are. We think they're aliens, but they definitely have multiple times been through multiple wars with these in multiple battles. And yeah, I really liked how the characters sort of develop over the book. I don't think I particularly love the main character in the beginning. I know some of the side characters were a little bit bland, but I think that they all develop really nicely, which I think is something that Sanderson often does. There'll always be the one character or two characters that I never really get to love, but that's okay, considering that's the majority of the characters I really like. One of the things that I also really enjoyed from this is that they had a really good AI storyline, and that's one of my favorite things in science fiction, so I really appreciated that. So overall, I ended up enjoying it a lot, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was The Adventure Zone, Here There Be Gerblins by Clint, Griffin, Justin, and Travis McElroy, as well as Carey Pietch. I think Carey Pietch is the artist, and the other 4 is like authors. This one follows, if I'd known this beforehand, I don't know if I would have handled it differently, but this is apparently a podcast that made their own graphic novel. So it's based on this podcast, and if you follow this podcast, you'll probably have an easier time getting into this story. But I ended up really enjoying it. I thought it was a whole lot of fun, and the humor was my kind of humor, and I love the art style. As I've said before, it reminded me a little bit of Valhalla, which is one of my favorite comics from Denmark, and so I really appreciated that aspect of it, and I had a lot of fun reading this, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. And this one covered arithmancy, where you were to read a book with more than one author, and this one has 4 authors and a graphic illustrator, so I figured that counts. The next thing that I finished was Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is a book that I started back in March but didn't get around to finish. This is the first book in the Lord Peter Wimsey series, and this is a classic mystery from before the 20s, obviously. This was a difficult book for me to read. I am not used to reading classics a lot, and I'm definitely not really used to the language they use. And this was very wordy considering that. But I ended up enjoying the mystery overall. I thought the mystery elements changed quite nicely, and I was able to follow along as the book progresses. It just took me a while to get used to the language. I did think that the overall mystery and the overall plot could have been better, so that's why I end up on a 3.5 stars, but I'm definitely very intrigued to try and read on in the series in the future, so I'm looking forward to at least doing that. The next thing that I finished was Fruits Basket Volume 7 by Natsuki Takaya. This is obviously in the series, and this follows, it's a magical realism type of graphic novel series where you follow a girl who becomes part of this family that has this secret curse that follows the family. One of the things I really enjoy about this is the friendship between our main character and how she's dealing with the different members of this family and how they always treat her. And I always find it to be a really cozy manga and really easy to read, and I always enjoy it. So I end up giving this 4 out of 5 stars and highly recommend this series as a whole. The next thing that I finished was Tempus Fugit by Kenneth Andersen. This is a standalone, very short book that follows this boy who in his old tree house finds an ancient pocket watch. Even though it's been hiding away, it ticks away as usual, and he finds out that he can set back the time with about an hour, but no more than that, and you can redo whatever experience that last hour and change it if you want to. But then it sort of covers, how is that going to work? How is that going to affect people around you? Could you actually do that and it will help your situation, or would it just make it worse? But he uses it because he has been bullied a lot over the past many years, and so he's trying to use it to try and actually give some help to this person, and he turns back the time and it's like nothing ever happened, because it didn't really happen in their time, but it did in his, because he changed it back and started over. But it messes with his mind a lot because things definitely start to be more creepy. And I really appreciated how creepy this book was. That's why I put it under horror, because I don't think this is a general normal type of story. It definitely had some pretty horrific elements happening. And I kind of liked how it ended. And it was quite strange reading, and it was really, really fast. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was A Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Fits and the Fool trilogy, which is the last and final series in the realm of the Elden universe. So I'm started on the last chapter of Fits, and I'm really, really anxious about how this is all going to end up. It took me a little bit time before I was really into it, and I haven't had time talking about this series without spoiling what happened in previous series, so I'm not gonna tell much more than the fact that we are meeting new characters in this one, and for the first time with a Fitch trilogy. Fitch usually is the narrator of his stories. It's only him who's been telling this story. But for the first time ever, we have multiple perspectives in a Fitch trilogy, which was interesting, but it made sense. It also made sense towards how the story changed over this book, so I found that Robin Hobb did the right thing. And I ended up really, really enjoying this book as a whole. I was so immersed in the story by the end, and Robin Hobb just has a way with creating characters that you might not have very much to say about them in the beginning, but by the end of the book or end of the series, you will just have a complete new, you have an opinion about each and every single character that she introduces you to. Even the side characters, no matter how minor they are, they always get a pretty important role in the story, or you definitely have an opinion about them in some way. And I really appreciate that. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Highly, highly enjoyed this. And this book also covered an owl, and it covered the Charms owl, where you were to read an adult work, and this is adult fantasy, so it works for that. The next thing that I finished was What Could Possibly Go Wrong by Jodi Taylor. This is book 6 in the Chronicles of St. Mary's series, and we're back to following the crew of the St. Mary's and the historians who works there, and our main character who is trying to teach a new group of historians the ways at the St. Mary's. And things always start out pretty quietly, but then everything goes wrong. And yeah, so the question, what could possibly go wrong, is everything can go wrong in this world, and everything does go wrong. And yeah, I always really enjoy these. They are very funny, and they have a very comfortable feeling surrounding them. It's like you're drinking tea and having a biscuit, whatever, and it's the British humor that I like. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. And this book also covers one of my owls, and it covers the Care of Magical Creatures owl because it has a land animal on the cover. I think I said it was elephant in my TBR, but it is obviously mammoths because they travel in time and you can totally see it's mammoths. I don't know why I said elephants. I'm sorry. The next book that I finished was Stolen Time by Danielle Rollins. This is the first book in a new series that focuses on time travel, and it is set in New Seattle. But it's also a little bit set in the past, because we start out by meeting a character from the past who somehow convinces the captain of this ship to come onto this so she can escape from the world that she's part of now. But this is a time travel ship, so it goes into the future where he's from in New Seattle in 2077, I think. And yeah, I was really disappointed with this. Like, time travel is one of my buzzwords. I read or get interested in a lot of things that has to do with time travel. And so I was really interested in reading this because of that. But I ended up not really caring much about the characters, and the magic system, the time travel system is something that I really didn't like. There were some elements of that didn't work for me at all. And so that it took away a lot of my enjoyment from this book. One of the things that I liked about this was that it portrayed the future pretty well and realistically compared to the climate changes we're seeing. So I like that aspect of it. But I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. This book covers my owl divination, which is about a book that's set in the future, and this one is partly set in the future because we follow this time-traveling crew. And they spent the majority of the time in the future, but trying to go back in time to change things as is usual with time travel novels. The next book that I finished was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is my Lala's favorite book of the month. And I started this and went through all types of emotions. I was not ready for all of the emotions that I went through over this book. I started out pretty much indifferent about the story. I remember distinctively, I started it, I thought it was okay, it's just like a regular romance novel. I was not really, the thing is, I go into most books not knowing anything about the plot, and that's how I like going into them. So I didn't know that the topic would be abuse when I started it. But then it went on, and I was like, oh my god, how is this going to change? I was so furious with things that was going on because he was in this abusive relationship, and I was like, oh my god, is this gonna end up with this having a terrible message to everyone? But honestly, by the end of it, I was so invested in this whole thing, and I thought it was handled really, really well. And I think that one of the most important messages from this one is that all abusive situations are different. You can't compare two abusive situations with each other and expect them to be the same and to be handled the same way. And also Colleen Hoover in her author's note mentioned how this was actually a personal story that went really close to her because this book was based on her parents' story. And so that made it also a little more interesting. I was really happy that she shared that with us, I guess. But I ended up really, really loving this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. But I will definitely mention that there are huge triggers for abusive situations. If that's something that triggers you, then definitely consider if it's something you want to read. I was surprised at how much I was invested in this one, and I had to take breaks every now and then because it was so brutal at times, and I had to step away from it for 5 minutes just to try and get away from it a little bit, but then I had to get back because I needed to know what was going to be happening in this book. Yeah, as I said, 5 stars. And this one also covers an owl. This covers my herbology owl, which was to read a book that had plants on the cover, and this one has some sort of flower. I feel like it's like a rose type of flower, but I don't remember. It's definitely flowers. That's been broken a little bit. The next thing that I finished was Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. This is a book that I already started last year for the BookTube SFF Awards, but I never came around to finishing it because I think I started too many things at once, and a lot of my friends read this and really didn't like it because of the humor. Really felt flat for them, and so I felt like I was almost afraid of being persuaded not to like it, even if I did. And I don't know if that's correct or what it was, but I definitely put it down and restarted it this year, and I listened to the audio instead of reading it this time around. And the audio narrator was really, really good at capturing the essence of the story, I think. And this follows a group of retired war heroes who were really big in their time, and people talk about them, and it's sort of like they were in a band and stuff. Like they were famous, and they had each their own roles in this band of heroes. But we start out by meeting Clay and Gabriel, because Gabriel finds out that his daughter is missing and she might be in grave danger from or even possibly being dead, but they want to try and as much as they can to save her. Clay is not really happy about going on this quest to save this girl until his own daughter persuades him to go with him. And so they go and reform this band, and they go on this adventure together to try and save Gabriel's daughter. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this one was that it didn't follow your average typical hero. It had they had real flaws, and they definitely had issues remembering how to fight. They were a bit rusty in places, and they couldn't really do the things that they used to do. So it made it for a really pretty realistic storyline. For me, the humor was not something that I cared too much about. I mean, I didn't hate the humor at all. I thought the humor was okay. I didn't love it, but it was good. I didn't mind the humor at all. So for me, it worked really well, but I can understand if this is the type of humor, because it has a little bit of that locker room type of humor sometimes. And for some people, that is not something they enjoy, and I understand that. But for me, I just went with it and enjoyed my time reading this. And I think that the narrator of the audio did a really, really good job capturing the humor, so that it was like told in a way that I was really excited about it, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Night Broken by Patricia Briggs. This is book 8 in the Mercy Thompson series, and this series is my favorite urban fantasy series, period. It follows Mercy Thompson, who's a walker, and walkers have the power to change into their walker animal at will. They don't have as many issues with that as other type of shapeshifters like werewolves does. In the beginning of this series, we don't know anything about walkers except that Mercy can turn into a coyote, and that is basically it. She's grown up in knowing about pack dynamics because her mother left her in the care of this old werewolf who is the alpha of all the alphas. Like in this area, he is the alpha of several different clans. So she grows up in this with him, but then later on in life she moves to the Tri-City area, and she lives under the protection of the alpha in this area, who is Adam Hauptmann. And Adam and Mercy is now married at this point in time, so like fast forward, a lot of things have happened. So she is part of this dynamics, and she's not always approved of by especially the women of this wolf pack are often not liking her, because they don't like the fact that she comes in and is more than them because she is the wife of the alpha. I enjoy the pack dynamics so much. I think there's so many interesting things happening. One of the things I really enjoyed about this book was that we were trying to figure out this new species that we haven't heard of before in this series, and they were trying to figure out how to defeat that, because this was the villain, and you didn't really know it. And then you learned a lot more about Mercy's walker history, which I always find exciting. I love background story, and this one had a lot of that. And yeah, I enjoy the friendships in here and all of that, and I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. And this one also covers an owl. It covers the Potion Owl, which was to read a sequel. The next book that I finished was Don't Let Go by Harlan Coben. This is another book from my Skyward TBR project, where I'm reading the mystery books at the moment. This one is a thriller that follows this detective of this smaller town as he's trying to solve the murder of his own twin brother and the twin brother's girlfriend of the time. They were brutally murdered, and it's a long time ago, but they never really found out who did it. And so this is like the mystery of trying to solve that. A lot of the parts from this mystery I enjoyed. I thought some of the elements of discovering this was interesting, and I do usually like these small town settings. However, I ended up guessing the murderer a bit earlier than it was revealed, at least. So that was not super fun. I like being surprised, obviously, when I read thrillers. But I also just had moments in time where I sort of forgot to listen along to the audio because it wasn't really capturing my attention as much as I wanted it to. Another mediocre mystery book from this list. Hopefully it gets better as I read more books from this list, but we'll see. The next book that I finished was The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. And I don't know if this is my favorite book of the month or if it's just I really enjoyed all of my 5-star reads of this month, so I don't know if I can say this is my favorite. I definitely love this one a lot. This follows Elma, who is a mathematician, and she's an ex-pilot, was pilot from the Second World War. And this is set in an alternative history where a meteorite strikes the Atlantic Ocean and sort of obliterates the whole eastern coast of the United States, and a lot of other places are infected by this as well, all over the world, causes catastrophic events. Because of Elma being a mathematician, she, with the help of her brother, who is also he is sort of an astrophysicist, something like that. I forgot what he is, but he, with his help and her mathematician skills, she finds out that if they don't get off this planet pretty soon, the humanity will become extinct. Because at first this will change, the meteorite striking the water will change the climate so that at first it will become really, really cold over multiple types of years. But then afterwards the temperature will start rising and will just keep rising until it's not habitable on this earth any longer. And so she convinces her husband convinces the president and the space crew to start a project of colonizing the moon. So this is basically the beginning of this, but she's living in the 50s, middle of the 50s, where there's a lot of women can't do this and this and this type of, So she has to spend a lot of time trying to convince the men at this crew that they need to add women to the space programs to go help colonizing the moon, because how are you going to colonize the moon without women? And how are you going to convince that women that it's safe to travel to the moon if you don't have any women being part of the space program? So basically that's the majority of this book, is her trying to convince the members of this that the women are needed. I mean, there's a lot of topics covered in these books, and it's all shown from Elma's perspective, which makes it I don't know if it would have been better if it had multiple perspectives. I personally really enjoyed it, but you see it from Elma's perspective, so she's very not noticing all of the racist things that happen in this world until she becomes it becomes pretty blunt and thrown in her face, because she becomes friends with this mayor and his wife, who are people of color, and she becomes part of this group of she becomes friends with this group of people of color who have really having a bad time being accepted in this community, in this world, and how they are trying to not include them in these programs because they don't want them to be part of it. And so slowly she begins to understand how big a problem this is. And I think that, I don't know, I really enjoyed this book as a whole. It covers so many topics that I was really interested, and I was immersed in the story from the beginning to the end, and highly recommend you reading this. I read this for the BookTube SFF Awards first and foremost, but I also actually read this for my owl because it has stars in the title, and then it covers the astronomy owl, and I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. Also, it portrays a really healthy relationship, which I also really appreciate. The next book that I finished was Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is book 2 in the Book of the Ancestor series, which is also nominated in the BookTube SFF Awards under the fantasy category. This is a sequel to Red Sister, which I read last year, and I really enjoyed it. I can't talk much about this series without spoiling it, but I definitely enjoyed our main characters and the ones we're following. I really enjoy the magic system. I think it's pretty gritty, but I'm always really immersed in this, and the narrator of the audio is amazing. I really love her narrating style, and she has such a nice voice, and I love this sequel. I think I liked it a lot more than the Red Sister, which I read last year, so I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, and highly recommend you reading this series. The next thing that I finished was Teen Dog by Jake Lawrence, which is the first in a series, I think. I haven't really looked more into it. It follows a group of high school kids, I guess, and a dog, teen dog. And for me, this was, in place it had some pretty good messages, but it was a little too quick going from one place to another. It was like it was in a rush to get somewhere, and I never really figured out where I wanted to go. So I didn't really love this one, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars because of the few messages I liked, and the art style is okay, like pretty simple. And there was not a lot of writing on a lot of the pages either. But I ended up giving it 3 stars because I wasn't super emotionally invested in this one, but I thought it was okay. I thought it was a pretty decent book. And this covered my Transfiguration Owl because it had red on the cover. I changed it last minute because I could see I couldn't finish the other things that I had on my original TBR. And then 19th and final thing that I finished in April was Rust, the Boy Soldier by Raiden Lepp. This is a prequel story to this series that follows the Boy Soldier, where it all began with him, I guess. This was another one that had almost nothing written on the pages. There was a lot of passages where you with multiple pages without anything on it, but just the images speaking for itself. I enjoyed this one a lot more. I was more emotionally invested in this, and this is an AI story, which I'm always really happy about. So I ended up being pretty invested, but I don't know if I want to continue with this one. Because this was just a prequel, so I don't really know. But I ended up giving this 3.5 stars because it was a little too quick, and I never really got completely into this before it was over. But I liked it more than the other one, so I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And this one covers an owl for defense against the dark arts because it has an art title, Rust, the Boy Soldier. And this, So these were all of the things that I've read in April. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've been talking about today. How did your April go? Did you finish your owls if you participated in that? Did you participate in other readathons, and what were they? Yeah, let me know if you have any new favorites that you read in April. I would always like to know that. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video very, very soon. Goodbye.